So I'm just going to give you guys a quick recap of what happened in the previous shirt stream, and let's see. So I went ahead and started with the style lines. So what I'm doing here is I am taking the major style lines of the shirt that I want to make, and I am applying it to the mannequin. And I do this because it's important when you're patterning a shirt to kind of have a good idea of what pattern pieces need to be drafted and how they're really going to come together. The style lines are a big part of that. So think of the style lines as like the major building blocks of the pattern that you're making. So I'm starting with the neckline and the center front. So with a pattern, most everything is anchored to, at least on the front bodice, to the center front, which is the center of your waist and the center of the front vertical. So that is where everything else is going to kind of relate to. So you see me measuring from the neck down to the center front, from the center front to the shoulder, and that kind of gives me where I'm going to place my neckline and the curve to create the collar line of the shirt. Also, when it comes to the sleeve, even when you're patterning the front bodice, you need to mark out where there's something called the break of the sleeve. So it's, I guess, on the frontmost part of this, both the bodice pattern and the sleeve pattern. That's where the sleeve is going to start to go underneath your armpit and match the side seam. So that's what I'm patterning here. And the other things I'm patterning is where is the waistline going to go on this pattern. I decided early on that I wanted to do a bias cut pattern. And what bias cut material does on a woven fabric is it gives you some movement. Now that most of the front bodice is created, I want to create a placket closure. So that's the type of the front center of a pattern. You know, if you look at a button-up shirt, there seems to be a piece of fabric that's like folded over where the buttons are attached. That is also called a placket. There's a bunch of different placket styles you can do. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start patterning the back bodice of my shirt pattern. Again, with the back, you need to center it somewhere, so you want to center it in the center back. So here what I'm doing is I am just to kind of visually figure everything out. I try to overlay the two patterns one on top of the other. It just gives me a better visual to figure out where things are going to go. And then the same thing here. What I'm doing in this step is I figured out where I'm going to place the shoulder seam and all that good stuff. So now I'm going to print out my first draft of the pattern. If you use Inkscape to do your patterning, or Adobe Photoshop or GIMP, there are various plugins and extensions you can get to allow you to print out your oversized format document onto 8.5 by 11 paper. Strongly encourage you to grab it. There's another software available out there called Valentino that is also very good open source patterning software. I wouldn't call it a production level, but I would say it's pretty decent, especially since it is free. So here's where I'm going to cut out the first draft of the shirt front. Whenever I'm doing a muslin, I actually only do a mock-up on the half. So that means I'm only going to create half of the garment instead of the full garment, which I always do, particularly when things are symmetrical. It'll take 50% off the amount of fabric that you need to use to make these things. You always want to start by ironing out your muslin before you cut your muslin. Really anything. If you're going to be cutting out a pattern, just make sure that it's nice and flat, the material you're cutting. So now that I've fit the front bodice pattern onto my mannequin, I noticed that the front of the shoulder seam is a little off. So what I did is I marked using pins and also pencil how far off that front shoulder seam is. And before I continue with the pattern, I'm going to go ahead and correct that in the software, which I've done. And this is the second copy of the front bodice pattern that I'm printing out. When you're patterning, the sooner you can correct a fit issue or a cut issue, the better your pattern will be when it comes to both constructing a garment and also patterning a garment. Errors are an accruing process. So if you make an error on one piece, it's going to transition to the next piece and the next piece, and it just becomes a big problem. So if you find an issue, it's better to correct it sooner than later. And also for this pattern, I added a yoke. On my first draft of the pattern, I didn't actually like print out and cut the yoke. So now I'm going to go ahead and print out and cut that. And also, if you notice, I'm cutting the bodice pieces of the pattern on the bias grain. That'll give it a little bit more, it'll kind of drape better than if you don't do that. So here we go. And there's my yoke pattern figured out, placed on the mannequin. What did I do? I think there was like another like issue that I needed to correct with this. Oh, I added the collar. So I just kind of mocked up a quick Mandarin collar just to see how the neckline in the front and the yoke match up with it, and it looks great. So I really like that collar. I'm going to stick with it. I cut out that pattern really quick, so what you see on the left is just a quick creation of the collar pattern. So now I'm going to see what's going on with the back of this pattern. And again, even though there's a back yoke, I'm going to start out by just making the overall shape. Pattern, I'm going to do my best to accurately kind of follow the style lines. Here, now that I've got the shape created, I'll add a seam allowance and some notes to the pattern piece, so I can go ahead and sew that. That looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and print that out and use that pattern. Before I attach the back bodice, what I'm doing is I'm clipping off the collar because the collar is on, it's impossible to put the back piece on. So here we go. One more time, I'm going to go ahead and print out my pattern, cut it out. I have a separate pair of scissors for my fabric versus my paper. So here I've gone cutting it out again on the bias screen for the back of the bodice. Oh, what's going on here? Oh, there we go. Okay. So one more time. Oh, by the way, I use pants hangers to store my patterns while I am, kind of working on them. So that's what's going on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and fit the back pattern piece onto my mannequin. So it fits pretty well. Again, both of these pieces are cut on bias, but if you look at that back piece, the shoulder seam is wildly out of place. So what you see on the left is where I'm going to go ahead and correct the shoulder seam and also correct the fit at the hem of the shirt. And pretty happy with what I've got there. So I'm going to go ahead and take these two pieces apart. Anytime that I'm doing a mock-up, I'll go ahead and use a basting stitch on my sewing machine to put them together. Now that I've corrected the fit in the computer, I'll go ahead and tape my pattern piece together. Again, if you're using GIMP, Inkscape, Adobe Illustrator to pattern, feel free to avail yourself of the numerous extensions that allow you to take a wide format piece of printing and cut it down into something 8.5 by 11 printable. So again, here's my improved pattern that I'll cut out of muslin. And again, this one is the full back pattern without the yoke. I just want to see what the shape is like for fit and pin that onto my mannequin and then add on my collar as well. And that is an excellent shape. So I'm really excited about the shape here. This is really where I wanted it to go. So that's great. And let's see. Okay, cool. So once again, I'm going to go right around the perimeter, add my seam allowance, add some notes, all that good stuff. And there we go. Cool. So I'm going to actually, on the muslin, I actually write on the muslin itself if I have any like important notes, and then I want to look and just kind of see what I like about the fit here. So there we go. I'm pretty excited about this. One thing that you can do with a mannequin that you cannot do with a human being is you can remove their arms. So I'm going to go ahead and take some notes, see what I like about this, what I don't like. Because this is like a work shirt pattern, you want to have a lot of ease so that your arm can move. So I've added that ease into both the front and the back bodice patterns. The amount of ease, I think it's like 3 inches just about. So one more time, I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick cleanup of my work surface. And now that I'm pretty happy with the front and back fit, I'm going to start patterning for the sleeve. So sleeves, people are like freaked out by making sleeves. Not that freaky. If you look at what I've got here, it actually does have dimension. The sleeve hole itself, the arm side, there is dimension. There is a width of your arm, of course, that you want to measure. And then there's the length of the hole. So you want to measure those 2 things. And you also want to measure the sleeve cap. What confuses people is like the very counterintuitive nature of making sleeve patterns. Even though the height from the very top of the armhole to the armpit is 6 inches, the sleeve cap measurement, which is from the top of the shoulder tip to just about where the arm, I guess, horizontally aligns with the bottom of the sleeve cap, that's actually like 7 inches. But I'm going to add extra room to it because this is a shirt that I'm making for myself, and I know that I have giant upper arms because I work out and also lift 75 to 100 pounds of fabric on a bolt. On every bolt every day, you get yoked out. So if you have muscular arms, that's the main adjustment you want to make, which is the sleeve cap has to be large enough to accommodate your arms. And then there's the width of the sleeve, and then there's width of the overall hole. So you can measure for those things and add those to your pattern. Also, length is a concern. Whenever I'm doing a mock-up, especially of a long sleeve, if it's the first version of the sleeve I'm doing, I actually only do half the sleeve or just the sleeve cap. The reason is that this sleeve cap is the hardest to fit and refine part of the sleeve pattern, and you'll use substantially less fabric if you just pattern the sleeve cap, make the adjustments, and then do the final version than if you have like multiple long sleeves. It's just a matter of just being wise with your use of fabrics. So once again, I'll go ahead and cut out my sleeve cap pattern using my fabric or my paper scissors, and then I'll go ahead and iron out some muslin. And then now that that is ironed out, I'll go ahead and cut out my muslin from the pattern, and I'll go ahead and note the front and the back where the center of the top is, and then I'll go ahead and move on to the next process, which is stitching right around the perimeter, a 5/8 inch seam allowance. That is going to be the seam where the top meets the bottom. I'm going to use a 3 cording foot and some cord to add cording to the top for, I think it's about 6 inch curve of the sleeve cap. I'm going to use the cording to help me shape the sleeve with a steam iron before I connect the sleeve to my my mock-up, to my actual front and back bodice. You want to shape it with your iron before you stitch it on, because that's what's going to give you a better looking sleeve and a better looking fit. If anyone has ever put together a sleeved shirt with a set-in sleeve and you're super frustrated about it, this is what you need to do. If you need to gather within the seam allowance, pin it up to your front and back bodice before you begin to stitch that seam together to get a better fit on your sleeved patterns of any kind. Also, I'm pinning. Also, if you notice, there's some clips in the seam allowance that is going to allow the fabric to really shape around the sleeve, and it's going to give you a much nicer fit. And the other benefit of stay stitching your 5/8 inch seam allowance, especially on your mock-ups, is you can see clearly where that seam allowance is, so that when you stitch it on with your machine, it goes on accurately. So here's the finished sleeve. Pretty good looking, right? And that's what it looks like. So here I can go ahead and nitpick and make whatever changes I want. If you can see up at the top, it just seemed to be a little bit too close to the upper arm, so I'm going to adjust my pattern to make the upper part of the sleeve just a little bit, you know, more like swole worthy, I guess, for my upper arms. And then in this step, what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and go ahead and select the newly transformed pattern pieces, and I'll go ahead and select those for printing, and then I'll actually start to construct the final version of this shirt. And let's see. So here, this part, I'm actually adding in the yoke, the back yoke. There's a front yoke and a back yoke. What a yoke does on a shirt is it gives that area, the upper chest, the upper back, just a little bit more crispness, so that when you wear it, you look like an official person wearing an official shirt. That's what the yoke is for, because the upper part of your back and the upper part of your chest are very flat. So if you can get that right, you can let the rest of it look great. So if you want to watch more, feel free to enjoy Fashion Made Live, the live stream. And wow, this totally looks like it's just kind of repeating itself. Oops, oh well. But yeah, so thank you for enjoying this recap. This has been a recap of Fashion Made Live, the shirt pattern stream.